All right. Hello and welcome everyone to another Chat and Learn here with Power to Fly. My name is Mariella Marie, and as always, super excited to roll into this next hour with you all. You all have submitted some great questions previous to this conversation. We've got quite a few folks on the call here. If you haven't already, please drop in the chat box. Let us know where you are in the world, and I'll give you all a shout out shortly. Before we get kicked off for today's conversation, I do want to go over some quick housekeeping rules so that we all feel comfortable and confident in this next hour. So we would love for you to participate. You could be doing anything else with your time. If you've joined these chats where I've moderated before, I really love to sound like a broken record and invite you all to hop off mute or turn your cameras on. I see we got some folks already turning their cameras on. So we believe in visibility here. This is a safe space. Please turn your cameras on if you feel called to do so. Otherwise, feel free to use the chat box. You can write any questions, any reflections, any tips and tricks of your own, any dreams that you had last night. We just really want to hear from you regarding today's conversation. So feel free to jump in at any point. I've muted everyone upon entrance just to avoid any background noise, but I can't stress enough, hop off mute whenever you have something you want to share. Let's just be respectful of everyone's voices and have one person off of mute at a time. You're also welcome to write in the chat box, again, your preferred ways of connecting. I really like reminding our folks who are calling live to use this time to network with people who are on the call with you. So drop your preferred way of connecting, any projects that you're working on, any resources that you think folks will find helpful. Feel free to drop that in the chat box. If you prefer to be kept anonymous, if you have any sensitive information and you prefer to be kept anonymous, you can find me in the chat box under Mariella Marie. And you can write to me privately there and I will flag your question or your reflection and keep you anonymous. The last thing I'll say is we'd love for you to follow us on social media and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can keep up with all the great chats we've got in store. And if this is your first chat where I'm moderating, I'll just take a couple seconds to introduce myself. So I really love speaking about the importance of emotional intelligence at home and in the workplace. So I might philosophize a little there, bring some of my reflections to that point. If anyone's interested in philosophizing on emotional intelligence and how we have so much room to grow there, feel free to do so. Otherwise, I invite you all to support my project that is called the Positive Force Team. You can go to thepositiveforceteam.org, sign up for our newsletter, or I'm happy to connect on LinkedIn. All right, so for today's topic today, we have a beautiful guest speaker who's calling from California today. I'm not sure where exactly. You'll have to remind me when I finish your introduction. But I'm actually from California as well. I'm currently in Argentina. So it's really nice to share space with folks who are, where I grew up. Bonnie Marcus is a leading expert on gendered ageism. She is the author of Not Done Yet: How Women Over 50 Regain Their Confidence and Claim Workplace Power and the Politics of Promotion, How High Achieving Women Get Ahead and Stay Ahead. She's a keynote speaker, certified executive coach, Forbes columnist, and host of the popular podcast Badass Women at Any Age. So you're going to get to pick her brain in just a few moments here. But I would just want to go over some principal themes that Bonnie plans to cover today. And then I'll stop sharing my screen and we'll roll into these awesome questions that you all have submitted. So take your pen and paper out. I like to remind folks to stop multitasking, close your windows, unless Bonnie throws a link in the chat box there, but try to be present with us so that we can really hear from you today. So the principal themes for today's conversation are: what is gendered ageism, the effect of gendered ageism on professional women in the workplace, and how to defy the ageist assumptions we believe as well as those we encounter in the workplace. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic to Bonnie. Feel free to let us know anything else about yourself for this introduction, and then I will roll right into the questions.
Oh, well, thanks for the great intro. And I'm so excited to be here and meet all of you today.
All right, there. So we're going to pull up the questions that you'll have submitted previous to the chat. If you hear your question come up and you're here today, please let us know that you're on the line just so that we can make sure that, we've answered your question. Or if a question comes to mind in the moment, again, hop off mute or write that in the chat box. Bonnie, before I give you this first question, I just want to shout out where folks are calling from. And then if you could clarify where in California you're calling from, that would be great. So we've got Santa Monica, California on the line. We've got New York City on the line, Kentucky, Los Angeles, Brooklyn, New York, Wisconsin, Nancy, New York. Again, I'm calling from Patagonia in Argentina. And Bonnie?
Santa Barbara, California.
Beautiful. Santa Barbara, California. Beautiful. All right. So let's start with this first question here. Can you give us some examples of what is and what isn't ageism?
Yeah. Well, ageism is any discrimination based on one's age, any bias, any discrimination. And it can show up a number of different ways. It can be like really blatant. So in my book, Not Done Yet, I did a lot of interviews of women who were currently working or had been pushed out. And one of the women was Blair, who started as a sales associate at Anthropology. And she was in her 50s. And she kept being sidelined, pushed in. They never took her out of the dressing room. She applied to be a manager and they ignored it. And finally, one day, her 30-year-old manager took her down into the basement, sat her down and said, "Look, Blair, you're just too old. Take a look around. Everybody else is young." So that eventually ended up in a lawsuit, by the way, which was settled with Urban Outfitters. But you couldn't be more blatant than that. That's like somebody like, pow, just hitting you with, you know what, you're just too old for this job. Um, Other examples are really demeaning comments that some of the women I've interviewed shared with me, like, "You're a dinosaur," or just look at you on Snapchat. Or you're over the hill. So there were some really direct comments that women had experienced in the workplace, but some of them can be a little more subtle, where maybe you're passed over for a promotion, or maybe you've been downsized and you're told that there isn't a budget. However, when you look around, you're the oldest woman on the team. And very often when women are applying for jobs, they're told that they're overqualified. In some cases, they're told they don't have the qualifications yet. And then they find out that a younger colleague did get the job, right out of school. So there's some stuff that's so blatant, you can't miss it. It's like somebody's hitting you over the head with it. And then there's some that are a lot more subtle. I find, when I started writing this book and doing the research, it really put up a mirror as to my own bias, right? And one of the things that I recognize that people will say to me a lot is like, "Oh, you look so young for your age." And by the way, I'm 73. And people would say that, and I realized, oh, I took that as a compliment. That's great. But on the other hand, that's really ageist. I mean, what am I supposed to look like at this age, right? So it shows up in a lot of different ways. And unfortunately, in the workplace, it really works against women and affects their financial security and job security.
I love that you ended it on that note because as you're speaking, the word equity comes up, right? It's like, okay, so clearly this is a problem within that sphere. And well, I have to be hopeful. I had someone hopped off mute there. If you do want to say something, just let me know. You're welcome to hop off mute. So in the equity space that is growing and growing by the second, it makes me so hopeful that these situations can be approached and there can be a remedy that is beneficial for everyone and no one has to be an outcast. Microaggressions always also comes up in a lot of the conversations that I have, just with any kind of ism, right? So any kind of ism, it's just like there's this thing that happens in our minds where we just become really, I don't want to say a bad word, but we just become really stupid and we say any kind of thing without thinking, without that empathy piece, without knowing that, um, the most that I want to expect from this person is that they're honest and respectful to me in this moment. So I have to expect that I give that back. So anyway, I can go into a whole emotional intelligence spiel there, but for me, equity was
No,
the
I
word
mean,
that came up.
I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the reasons why I've done this research and why I wrote the book, Not Done Yet, is to bring more awareness to it, because ageism and gendered ageism, especially, so ingrained in our society. that we don't even recognize. It's just so common and so normal. You go to buy a birthday card for a female friend. Oh my gosh, it's like you need to have a glass of wine or a bottle of wine to face the fact you're turning 50, or, any of you who've gone out and looked for birthday cards for a woman who's, say, over 45 or whatever. They're so ageist. And we have absorbed it. But I think that a lot of what we say, to your point, is it's not malicious. We just, people aren't aware that they are being ageist when they say things. And I think it's up to us to kind of let people know that we found it offensive, that it definitely affected us in a certain way, and call it out, because I think a lot of people don't necessarily mean to be malicious or demeaning with their comments. But like I said, it's so ingrained in our society that it's just so common.
Absolutely. I mean, I think this conversation definitely deserves a couple more hours because we could dive into all these pieces here. But let's move on with the questions that folks have submitted. And then after this question, folks, I want to hear from you. So if you want to hop off mute and drop in the chat box, be looking out for that moment because I'm going to look for folks who might want to share their voice. Okay, so at what age do you see employees starting to deal with ageism? Is ageism a factor in all industries?
So according to AARP research, ageism begins at the age of 40 in the workplace. And a lot of studies show that that is very true, but especially for women. So research by Catalyst in their trend brief had said that as women start to show visible signs of aging, so it can be 40, 45, 50, whatever that is, because everybody's different. They face age discrimination earlier than their male counterparts based on what they call lookism. And that's the value that our society places on youth and beauty. So it depends on the individual, and it also somewhat depends on your company. In the research that I've done, there wasn't any industry that necessarily stood out as worse than others, but we do know that entertainment, media, TV, advertising, where looks are so important, and TV anchors have been dismissed and there have been lawsuits as they approach 40 and 45. So any of those industries, and then tech, right? There's a lot of ageism, and especially gendered ageism, in Silicon Valley. I hope that answers the question.
Absolutely. I'm sorry, I was lost in contemplation because I really like speaking about the digital space and, in my opinion, how it's being colonized, which means we have this one way of, like, a standard way of being social based on these status quo ways of what beauty means, based on what Hollywood has already defined. It's this loop that we're getting into, and I really hope that folks who are working in the tech space and whatever industry can add a new, story, their voice, essentially, so that there is less room for, locking up the tables. Like people say, making space at the table. Some people are saying make their own table, but so that we don't run into the same problem that we are facing today. That's another rant, but I'm happy that you are essentially asking us to come back to our humanity and dismantle, what does beauty mean? What does productivity mean? Someone in the chat box wrote something to the extent of, when men age, they're seen as sages or wise in the workplace, or experts. I would love to hear you comment on that. I see you nodding your head.
And by the way, research shows that as men age, their income increases, whereas for women, it decreases. And the research also shows that as women show visible signs of aging, again, they are viewed as less competent really less competent to be able to perform their jobs. So there's such a strong correlation between how we look, how we appear, and the way we are perceived in the workplace.
Absolutely.
May I say something? My name is Sarah Rotaro. I'm from Jerusalem, Israel.
Hi, Sarah.
I had that story that about 40, when I had to leave, I am a biochemist. I have to leave the hospital. Nobody wanted to recruit me. So I changed my working place and I went to be a secretary. Since I know 4 languages and I knew computers, I could get it. But I found myself very difficult to find a place. It took me about a year to find a place. They told me, go home and take care of your kids. That's what I got.
So that's sexist.
Yes, that's what
you can't deny it. In the recent research that I've done on gendered ageism, I find that gendered ageism affects women throughout our careers. Very young women, like 77% of the women under 35 reported gendered ageism, right? The same kind of thing that older women face, not invited to key meetings, their opinions being ignored. And then as women hit maybe 38 and 40, only 60% experience gendered ageism. But that's when we're raising kids and we face the motherhood penalty. And then every year after that, incrementally up to 64, there was more and more women who stated that they experienced gendered ageism, to the point where it was like 88% or something. So it's the combination, Sarah, of both the age and the sexism. Go home and
know that. But afterwards, I work in a few places and I went back to be a biochemist in a lab. I just fight to do it and I did it.
That's great. But you were unemployed for a year.
And you have to prove yourself and to show what you're worth it.
I definitely agree.
It's difficult, and as you said, it's sexist and also, but I did it.
And the fact that you were unemployed for a year is actually pretty good. I hate to say that, because a lot of the women I've interviewed have been unemployed and trying to get rehired for much longer periods of time. And they can't even get interviews. Yeah.
Maybe I was lucky, but I don't know. I just know that that's what I did, and I just fight for every place I went to. Even today that I am 69, almost 70, and I still working, and I think that is the best thing that I can do.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you, Sarah. So I guess if I could take some of your tips for any person who is going through this situation now: perseverance, not letting anyone tell you no, or not letting that unless you wanted to change your career. A lot of people.
That's what I did.
Yeah, exactly. That's
what I did. I realized that as a biochemist, a medical biochemist, I couldn't continue working because there were no places. So I decided to do a change in career. So
Beautiful. Thank you, Sarah.
You have to think of it and to realize that if you want to be happy and to want to, don't know how to explain it.
Thank you, Sarah. Okay, so let's move on to these other questions. We've got folks writing in the chat box, excited to get to the strategies. So just to finish setting up the stage with the basics sort of questions that you all submitted before. I'll cover one more, and then Bonnie, I'll go into some more of the questions about strategies, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So let's see here. Which factors are most likely to generate gendered ageism? You spoke a little bit about the visual signs. There's a private question here in the chat box that I kind of want to link to that question here. So I'm looking for work in media. In many job applications, there's a federal question about disabilities. I answer yes because I have become deaf in one ear. I work in a role that occasionally reviews audio. I can do it, and my 19-year-old backs me up. Can answering yes due to deafness, often an age-related malady, hurt my chances of getting interviewed?
Wow. I'm not that familiar with the space that you're in. Um, and I I don't know if you answer yes, that means that you feel that you are not able to take on the duties of the job. So I guess I would hesitate to say yes in that scenario when if you can still do the job for whatever, for however, whatever the capabilities are, the requirements of that job. What was the beginning part, Mariella, of the question?
The question that was submitted previously?
Oh, about what triggers it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, appearance triggers it. And in my book, I interviewed a lot of women who had Botox and plastic surgery, and they said that that's the only way they felt they could keep their jobs. One woman who was 63 in fashion industry who said she wakes up in panic attacks, like 3 o'clock in the morning, that someone's going to find out how old she is. She's going to lose her job, and then what does she do? So it definitely is a strong factor. That being said, we need to lead with our value. We need to lead with what we can bring to an organization to help them move forward. And at the same time, I would say that we need to be mindful of our appearance. We can't dress frumpy and show up in an interview or work. We need to be professional and need to show that we are professional in the way we are perceived in the workplace. Another woman that I interviewed in my book, Lois Frankel, who's an internationally well-known coach and writer, was interviewing at a Hollywood studio as an executive coach with one of the executives. She thought the interview went really well, and she went to when she didn't get the job, she asked why, and then she had just gone through chemotherapy and her hair was bright white, and she kind of liked it. So when she asked why, and they answered, Lois, ours is a youth culture. She went back and dyed her hair blonde. Because she realized, hey, if that's what it takes for me to keep my job, if that's what it takes for me to continue to be viable in the workplace, I'm going to continue to do it. So I was just an example. I mean, the decisions that you make, whether or not you go gray or you don't go gray, are totally an individual decision. But you have to be mindful that's the way people perceive you. And then also lead with what you can bring to an organization. What is your value? What is your value proposition, which I talk about a lot in my books.
Well, I'm grateful for your research. I love speaking about just the different voices that we need to add to research. For example, this is why I'm loving the research that I'm doing on emotional intelligence, because there aren't many people who have my perspective, who are writing about, how to approach it and how to understand and how to ask different questions. So the fact that you're going in with these, specific questions, and your storytelling is the best way also to show this evidence. A lot of folks are stuck on numbers. Numbers are powerful as well, but when you get these stories from people,
I can give you lots of numbers.
Yeah.
I can give you a lot of stats, but they don't mean as much.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's move into this next question. Annie, I think this ties into the question you wrote into the chat box, but if not, I'll raise it a little after. Okay, so do you agree with the recent studies claiming that ageism is worse for women in the continued fallout from the pandemic? How can we counteract this terrible discrimination practice to land an appropriate role based on our value experience?
Right. So women have suffered. I mean, and you look at the numbers, women have not only been pushed, older women have not only been pushed out, but younger women have had to leave the workplace because they have, caregiving responsibilities, whether it's parents or children or partners, whatever whatever challenges that they may have. The real challenge is if you drop out or if you've lost your job, well, how do you show up as marketable? How do you show up as the right person for the job? And there are lots of tips, certainly, that I give in my book. But I'm going to go back to what I said a couple of minutes ago. Understanding your value proposition, which I define as how your work and the way you do your work leads to positive business outcomes, is your powerful lead in. So when you're applying for a job and you see that company's mission or their objectives is to reach XYZ. Maybe it's increase their audience, maybe it's increase their revenue in a certain area. Tie what you bring to the table, your value proposition, with how you can take that company reach their objectives, how you can take that decision maker forward. What are they hoping to achieve? And how, based on your value proposition, can you help them move forward? And I know there's a lot of discussions about resume and experience, and certainly we need to own all of our wisdom and our talent and our experience. But when you're presenting yourself to a new employer, you don't want to focus so much on the past. You want to be present. You want to say, this is what I can help you do. This is how I can help you reach these objectives and move forward based on who I am and my value proposition. So it's a bit of a shift, and this is how I coach a lot of my clients. You don't want to sit there in an interview and talk about, well, I did this and I did that and I did this, and really dwell on that. They already have your resume, so they know that. Really what you want to impress on them is what you bring to them right now that will help them, how it will help them, not how it will help you. Hope that helps answer that question.
Absolutely. And I'm just in case, because I think you can probably go deeper there, I want to tie in Annie's question that relates to the previous question. How can we overcome gendered ageism when looking for a new job? Now, you did mention about like ownership of the resume. What about that digital interview or physical interview? Anything else you want to speak on as opposed to avoiding that or overcoming that while looking for a job?
Unfortunately, and I recently wrote an article on this on Forbes, right? Artificial intelligence, there's so much bias ingrained in the coding for hiring and promoting and all this stuff that there are nuances that aren't even picked up. And when the information in your resume may get kicked out because of keywords or things that are in there that are so biased. And right now, except bringing this to everybody's attention that we need more women to be coding these, this, and for companies to assess all their practices, the best we can do in an interview is to own who we are, own your story, own the wisdom and the talent and the power of your age. And again, the best way to position yourself is how you can help this organization reach its objectives, how you can help them move forward, and be very powerful of it. Don't be apologetic about your age. I know there was a question about, putting your age or somebody asking your age during an interview. Don't apologize for it, because you are the sum total of all your experience and wisdom, and you have a wealth of wisdom to bring an employer. And sometimes it just takes a shift in our mindset to own all that and to understand that, wow, yeah. And that helps us show up in a more powerful way, rather than, oh, maybe they're going to ask me my age or graduation date or this or that or the other thing, and really be, kind of apologetic about it. No, own who you are, own what you bring to the table.
I have a quick question. So let's say that someone like the hiring manager, let's say in this case, isn't educated in that they don't really know that it's inappropriate to ask these kinds of questions, right? Let's just give them the benefit of the doubt. And let's say they ask a question that is, asks for a hard date or something like that, that I feel like is a taboo in this arena. It's like, okay, I can't tell them when I graduated or something like that. What is the appropriate response if you don't want to answer? Can you say something like, I don't think that's relevant, and I'd like to talk about how I can, I don't know, bring it back to
I mean, you can. First of all, it's illegal for them to ask your age. It's not illegal to say, when did you graduate? And I would just advise to answer the question. No apologies. Well, I graduated in 1984, and and perhaps add, and I continue, or every year I continue to expand my knowledge base in this area by doing this, this, and this. Just drop the date, say yeah, and move forward and continue to promote yourself.
Great advice. Great advice. Also, let them remind them that the algorithm doesn't know everything. I can talk for days about that. We got a lot of work to do, because there's, like you said so clearly, folks are putting that bias into the algorithm, and so it's a whole different ballgame. Nancy writes, I think this is important to raise. Women also need to be more supportive of other women by way of info, connecting, advice, encouragement, etc. I would love to hear your response to that.
Oh, really important. And if we have the opportunity to mentor others as well as support them, it's so, so important. We talk about the importance of having male allies and champions in the workplace, but we also need female. And we also should expand our network to include younger females. Cross-generational networking is now kind of a thing that people are bringing more awareness to, about the importance of developing relationships across generations so that you can learn from each other. But women supporting women, yeah, we need more of it. And I think it's so short-sighted of a lot of companies to push out women over 50, over 60, when they are publicly declaring that they are working to advance women in the workplace. Because we know, and research shows, that when young women enter the workplace and they look up at leadership and they're only old white men, they don't have any role models. They don't have mentors or sponsors who can help them to, as a woman, to navigate the dynamics of the workplace. And when you push out all those older, it's more senior women, those role models don't exist for younger women. Makes it much more challenging.
So I want to take you deeper, because I have got a question coming up in the chat box that I want to tie into a previously submitted question. Speaking about companies, Anna writes, companies often do not do what they say, especially during these touchy topics. I assume is what you're referring to, Anna. Probably a lot of other things as well, but especially, how are we combating the isms in the workplace, and in this case, ageism. This question that was previously submitted reads, how are companies ensuring gendered ageism isn't threatening women as we return to reopening offices and or using hybrid work models?
They aren't ensuring anything regarding gendered ageism. Not at all. There are very few companies. I think PricewaterhouseCoopers said that there were like 9 public companies that even addressed ageism. But what you find when you dig into DEI initiatives is there are very, very few companies that look at the intersectionality of, say, gender and race, gender and age. I mean, we don't look at these things, but to answer that question, I wish I had more positive response. It's totally under the radar.
I think, I mean, if I can just think of the power of networking on social medias, and let's say like LinkedIn specifically, I've seen a lot of, advocacy groups popping up, especially after the crazy, past couple of years we've had. So maybe that's the space where more, maybe the answer is community focused, since nothing is necessarily moving at the rate that it needs to move within companies. I mean, especially in technology, and with machine learning and artificial intelligence, and I don't know, have you seen any kind of community social network building as?
Yeah, I mean, there are many more organizations now focused on ageism. Um, you know, I tend to be the voice for gendered ageism because, again, a lot of people aren't looking specifically about how this affects women, and I I kind of draw a parallel to where women were before the Me Too movement. So where we were was, well, maybe we were sexually harassed, maybe we were even abused, but we we were afraid to talk about it or bring it forward for fear that we would lose our jobs, or we'd be punished in some way. There wasn't a safe environment to bring forward our experiences. And it's very similar now to gendered ageism. And many of the women that I interviewed for my book, Not Done Yet, insisted on being anonymous because they feared that there would be retaliation, right? So there isn't a safe environment, and companies really need to look at their workplace policies and practices to assess this and how it impacts women. But we need to bring awareness to it, and that's my mission, is to bring more awareness to it. So, like, similar to Me Too.
Great, thank you for that. Yes, Me Too popped in my mind, but I'm happy that you went for it, because I didn't want to. I mean, of course, we are all shaping that now, just the progression of that day by day. I mean, it's also done worlds in the global South. So the Me Too movement is pretty global. And so the fact that, folks were able to join forces on social media just to speak about it and create more digital safe spaces, I think it has loosened up some. I mean, we've got a long way to go, of course, but it has loosened up some of the tension that we've experienced. Okay, so let's go into what to do. So these questions, these following questions have to do with that you all have submitted previous to the conversation. So what should we be asking in interviews to determine if the company culture is supportive of older workers? What should our reaction or response be if the answer is unsatisfactory?
Well, some of the questions you could ask are around their DEI initiatives. So what does DEI look like? How valued is it? How important is it in the workplace? And what are some of the ways that they are countering some of the discrimination and bias? And in fact, is ageism included? So, I mean, that's certainly one way to, and are some of these bias programs, are they mandatory? And are managers and leaders, held accountable for some of this? So if you put it under the DEI umbrella, you could certainly ask that. You'd want to know also whether they have a culture of retaining their employees over time. Do they promote from within? And what is the makeup of the leadership team? You probably could research this. You don't need to ask it. How many women are on that leadership team? But I would ask, say there are women on the leadership team. Were they hired from outside? Were they promoted from within? So these are the kinds of questions which would help you to determine how important some of these initiatives are for the company.
Good point. Good point. Okay, so I'm going to bring up a question that was dropped in the chat box that a little further back, but I think it's a good time to bring it up now. So this is a private question here. Just because something is common doesn't make it okay. And many people or companies are just beginning to view ageism as discrimination. Fortunately, relaunch programs are beginning to address this. What's interesting, there was a time when people were told they shouldn't put a photo on a resume. And now with LinkedIn, Zoom interviews, et cetera, it's easy for recruiters and HR people to see the person behind the resume, even with the basic search. When are hiring laws going to catch up with this? It's hard to prove, and it certainly can't help one's job search. Or is this the genie, or is the genie out of the bottle? So what would you, what would you like to just comment on? This is thank you for writing this private message.
I wish the genie were out of the bottle. This is what I'm working toward, and other people are working toward, is to build more awareness about it, that, ageism is so prevalent. And, in my research, it was like 82% of the women who work in public companies said they experienced ageism, something like 72% of those in private. And it's not on anybody's radar as to what the effect of that is. How ingrained is it in policies and procedures? So, I wish I had more positive news. The only thing I can say is we need to keep bringing awareness to it. And to your point earlier, there are more grassroots organizations that are, out there bringing attention to ageism, and in some cases, gendered ageism. And it needs to happen more in companies. And, the reason I focus on the workplace is it affects our careers. It affects our financial future. I mean, over 50% of the women 59 to 64 that don't have enough money to retire, right? And it gets worse as women get older, and women want and need to work, and gendered ageism really keeps them out of the workplace.
This is a good moment for me to ask folks who are joining live to drop any preferred way of connecting in the chat box, so that you all can share stories there, or maybe find ways to support each other as you look for work or look to pivot careers. I know that this is definitely, as Bonnie is saying, this is not on our radars enough. And so maybe we can be intentional about this, small space that we're sharing today. So feel free to drop your LinkedIns or whatever way you prefer to be connected with. I don't like to push LinkedIn's because I know that everyone has their preferred way. So if it's your email address or your website, or, whatever, I've seen people give their phone numbers out. Go ahead and drop in the chat box your preferred way of connecting. I will lead by example, so I'll go ahead and do it so that you all can also warm up there. And we've got just about 15 more minutes left. So if you also want to hop off of mute, you've got about 15 minutes left to shine. I'll read one more question here and see if someone wants to use that opportunity to ask Bonnie a question. All right, so let's get a little more specific. This question reads, I'm a woman in tech and nearing my 60th birthday. I've been the only woman in male-dominated teams for most of my career, but now I feel like the expectation, excuse me, of retirement will force me out of a career I love. How can I convey that I have no intention of retiring and I'm still top of my game? I worry that I need to appear young to be acknowledged or valued.
Okay. So one of the first tips that I give in my book, not done yet, is to declare your ambition. You know, bring it out in the open. And managers make assumptions that as you're approaching 60, maybe you're going to want to retire soon or slow down or whatever. And if that's not you, then have a direct conversation with your manager and say, look, I'm invested and committed in continuing to do my best work. How do you see me continue to add value over the next few years? What are some of the ways that I can come up with a plan? If that's 5 years, if that's 10 years, that you both buy into it and there's a commitment. But definitely don't be silent about it. Have that conversation that you are still committed to doing your best work and want to know what that would look like over the next 5, 10 years or whatever that you would like to commit to.
You know, the irony is I just read something about, I'm sure you all have heard of the acronym. I'm pretty late to the game, but FANG, right? Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google. I'm missing one. Someone help me out there. Amazon, Apple. So it's 2 A's in the FANG. Okay. I was watching this developer give tips on how to apply to these like big companies, these big tech companies. And something that he pointed out is that lots of folks don't stay for after 2 years. So their return is very low. And I wonder, I mean, isn't it ironic that maybe one of the reasons for not hiring someone due to gendered ageism is we want you around for a long time, but nobody or not a lot of people are hanging out for a long time in some of these companies.
And the younger, younger employees tend to turn over a lot more quickly. Maybe they'll stay 2 years, tops 3 years. But another point for the importance of hiring older workers is that they have much more loyalty and they do tend to stay on the job. And so, again, this is a point that needs to be brought up to companies, is that turnover costs them money. They have to rehire, they have to retrain, and then and they invest in their employees, and then they're gone.
Great. I want to see if someone wants to hop off mute and use this opportunity to voice a question or a reflection. We've got about 10 minutes left, so just want to give some space for folks who want to hop off mute.
It's Sarah again. I want to tell you something. Where I live, there is a law. At the age of 69, a woman have to go to a pension. And many don't want to. But the law says that you have to, even if you don't. What I did, I have no reason. I had to live where I work in a lab. So I searched for a job for hours. How many hours I got my pension, and then I also work 4 hours because I want to work. I want to be active.
Yeah, I mean, according to my research, not only do women want to keep working, they need to keep working, and don't have enough money to retire. I mean, here in the United States, we don't have mandated retirement, but that doesn't mean that it's still not something that is practiced, that we look at people 65 and want to push them out.
Here we have, and many women want to continue working and cannot do it.
We've got a long way to go, that's for sure. So I think that hopefully my I'm hopeful that these kinds of conversations can help us get there together. So actually, this is a great moment, Bonnie. Can you remind us how folks can get in touch with you if they're interested in continuing the conversation or, learning when your book and next books are released?
My next book. So my website is bonniemarcusleadership.com, and you can reach me, Bonnie, at bonniemarcusleadership.com. All the information about my books, which are available wherever you buy books, any kind of Amazon, Barnes and Noble, the book is there. And it's also available on Audible as an audio book, both books. Well, both books are. If you go to my website, you can download, there's a free download of 5 tips to own the superpower of your age. I really believe that a good part of our battle is with ourselves, within ourselves, and understanding that we hold ageist beliefs and stereotypes and makes assumptions where we end up sabotaging ourselves. And the first place to start is really to understand what ageist beliefs do we hold and how may they be affecting us, not only in our relationships, but in the workplace. Really important. If we believe we're too old to learn new things, if we believe we're too old to ask for a raise, it's really going to hold us back. And the other thing is my podcast, Badass Women at Any Age. I just found out from Apple Music that it's now available on Apple Music, as well as Apple and all the other outlets where you listen to podcasts. And that's a really fun podcast. I interview women each week and ask them what their story is and how they've arrived where they are today. And it's very inspiring.
Awesome. Okay, Zoe has a question. I believe you submitted a couple questions, so let me know if this is the correct one, Zoe, that I'm going to highlight now. I'm focusing on staying. Oh, let's see. Wait, let's see. Where is it? I lost it. Actually, maybe you can do it faster if you hop off mute. Are you interested? Okay, I think I found it. How do we use our mindset to avoid internalizing the data and experiences and use positive strategies that move forward our chances? This is a great way to actually wrap up this conversation. Bonnie, I would love to hear your reflection there.
Yeah. So the first thing is we need to identify what our own beliefs are and what our own assumptions are. And by the way, not even related to gendered ageism, but ageism in general. There's research from Yale that shows if you have a positive mindset about aging, you actually live an average of 7.5 years longer. So it really affects not only the way we show up, but our longevity. Another thing is if you hang out with girlfriends, that's also powerful and ends up affecting your longevity. But the mindset is so important. And I would tell everybody to take some time and self-reflect and unplug and put your feet up. And if you need to, pour a glass of wine, whatever it is, to really connect with what some of your deeply held beliefs are. And if they don't support you, if that story that you're currently telling yourself about yourself does not support you, then rewrite the story for one that is much more empowering. So it's a 2-step exercise. First of all, what is the story? What's that voice in your head? What's the story you're currently telling yourself about yourself? Because words matter, words are powerful. And then take a look at it and say, well, that's not going to help support me going forward. So rewrite it and read that and post it and read it to yourself every day to help you move from the more negative to positive.
Yes, because of course, as we look into data and hear more stories, of course, it can be pretty overwhelming, right? And so how do you find the positivity in that? And I love that the response is to change your story or at least self-reflect to where you know that you are powerful and you don't really need anyone else to make you second guess that. So I know it's easier said than done, of course. You're pointing the finger back to the person saying,
It
we've got
is
to come
easy,
back.
but it's a practice. You
Mm.
don't do it in 5 minutes. You know, it's a practice that you need to commit to.
Absolutely. So we've got a little more time left, and we've got some last minute questions popping up in the chat. So I'd love to cover some of those. So we've got a couple questions specifically about these big platforms. So big, let's say the big tech folks. Do you have any resources? One question was, do you have any resources on like certain things that they can ask for or check out maybe on their websites or in the interviews to make sure that, you know, they are making space for them? Another question here is, I want to know how we can explore opportunities in big platforms. Can we have a conversation about that? So I mean, you can really just bring that to, you know, how people are, you know, speaking about innovation these days and technology in particular, and how they're making space for, you know, everyone and not, you know, practicing gendered ageism.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I want to throw out there is, and it kind of gets back to networking. You know, the best way to counter the artificial intelligence and the screening that's in place is to be able to find a champion or network with somebody who works at that company who can help you open up a door, et cetera. When I look back on my 25-year corporate career, right? I went from entry level to running a national company, CEO of a national company. Except for the first job, every job I got was a referral from somebody that I had worked with, somebody who knew me, somebody who knew my value proposition and opened up the door. So it's so important to develop those relationships, because that's the most powerful way to get an interview, to sidestep some of the bias that exists in the hiring process. So I think that's really important for everyone to know, that your efforts, yeah, I mean, you can apply to jobs and some of these big companies online, but if you have a champion, if you have somebody who can support you and open up a door for you, it's the best way.
And I love that you also referred folks to start mentoring if they haven't already, or to just, you know, build those bridges, because that's another way of networking that's, I find, a little less like, okay, the word networking has become kind of this like super giant of like, okay, how do I do it if I'm an introvert, or how do I do it online? And I find mentorship is more of a giving and more of an exchange, but it completely generates networking opportunities. So I'll throw that in as a reminder that Bonnie mentioned that earlier. This has been such a fruitful conversation. The time has flown by. Can you leave us with some food for thought? You've left us with so much already, but I'd love for you to have the final words here.
Oh, I think my final words just need to be empowering, right? Own your story, own your journey, own your talent and your experience and everything that it has taken to get to where you are today. Never apologize for it. And that will put you in a very, very powerful position, where it doesn't matter chronologically whether you're 40, 50, 60, 70, whatever. You know, you are a powerful force and you have a lot to offer.
Beautifully said. Thank you, Bonnie, and thank you everyone who's joined us today. Be looking out for a rewatch email if you signed up for this chat. You'll get the link to this video that you can share with your friends, your community, your family, and also any link to resources like the book that Bonnie has. I'm really excited to also read and just generate some of that data and spread the word as well. So again, thank you, Bonnie. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.